Oz the depressed said, I will make this fucking say my grill's name. Lomax 223 said, what the fuck did I just say? Oz the depressed said, if this is the last thing I do. Oz the depressed said, let's. Oz the depressed said, fucking. Oz the depressed said, go. Oz the depressed said, you cunts. Oz the depressed said, battle. Oz the depressed said, damn, text-to-speech is so fucking boring. Oz the depressed said, anyways. Oz the depressed said, I no. Lomax 223 said, OMAWAMOUSHINDEVIRU. Oz the depressed said, nanny. Lomax 223 said, KA boom. Oz the depressed said, oh, text-to-speech almost gets nanny right. Oz the depressed said, anyway, silo no. Lomax 223 said, Omi wa mu shindairu. Oz the depressed said, damn. Oz the depressed said, how about a H? Lomax 223 said, does. Oz the depressed said, what else is there to do? Lomax 223 said, WHF9 AG go half wag swiggy F9 was 9 if. Oz the depressed said, oh, I know. Oz the depressed said, listen. Oz the depressed said, daily. Lomax 223 said, Jesus. Oz the depressed said, wow, can't say listen right, but daily is right on the money. Oz the depressed said, that's fucking gay. Oz the depressed said, can't even say day right. Lomax 223 said, I am chew ass and kick bubble gum, but I am all out of ass. Oz the depressed said, I wonder if it can say fucking liberal rapist. Oz the depressed said, and so it can. Oz the depressed said, what the fuck is Duck Jesus doing? Lomax 223 said, Lomax 223. Oz the depressed said, oh no, not Duck Jesus. Oz the depressed said, he will rape me. Oz the depressed said, I knew it. Oz the depressed said, this will be my end. Lomax 223 said, quack quack quack. Oz the depressed said, only Monica. Oz the depressed said, greater than :v. Lomax 223 said, QUAAAACK. Oz the depressed said, crack. Oz the depressed said, cracker ass looking motherfucker. Lomax 223 said, equals quick. Oz the depressed said, you know the whack. Oz the depressed said, text-to-speech you fucked idiot. Lomax 223 said, spit on tape fake QUEN. Oz the depressed said, wait. Oz the depressed said, can't text-to-speech say it. Oz the depressed said, IT. Oz the depressed said, oh my fucking god. Lomax 223 said, Google. Oz the depressed said, why is this free ass text-to-speech so fucking retarded? Oz the depressed said, kill yourself Shiloh. Lomax 223 said Shiloh. And Oz the Depressed said, what's your real name? Lomax 223 said Geole. Lomax 223 said Pew. And Oz the Depressed said, no, I mean the one your pussy birther gave you. And Oz the Depressed said, the one that killed herself because of you. And Oz the Depressed said, like how mine is text-to-speech the third they met retard. Lomax 223 said Shiloh is now a transgender. And Oz the Depressed said, well, that's fucking weak. And Oz the Depressed said he's actually gender fluid. Lomax 223 said fuck you too. And Oz the Depressed said because he doesn't even know his fucking dick size XD. Lomax 223 said oh Shipnim is back. And Oz the Depressed said also I can't be fucked by you, only my grill. And Oz the Depressed said twinches. And Oz the Depressed said what the fuck. And Oz the Depressed said my dick's smaller than yours. And Oz the Depressed said how the fuck. And Oz the Depressed said what the fuck is this shit. And Oz the Depressed said nim. Lomax 223 said big boy help Emmy. And Oz the Depressed said he won't help us. And Oz the Depressed said he has lost all. Lomax 223 said inhale the mem. And Oz the Depressed said accept his virginity. And Oz the Depressed said he will never lose that. And Oz the Depressed said I can't fuck off if you're the one fucking off. And Oz the Depressed said that doesn't make sense. Lomax 223 said I inject mems into my bloodstream. And Oz the Depressed said fucking queer. Lomax 223 said exclamation point work. And Oz the Depressed said I snort them and stuff them into my urethra on a day-to-day basis. Lomax 223 said mem machine. And Oz the Depressed said after I am done stuffing mems into my dick hole I then proceed to suck my own dick to eat the mems out. And Oz the Depressed said why must text-to-speech not be able to say mems? And Oz the Depressed said this upsets me. And Oz the Depressed said me mess. And Oz the Depressed said nope. And Oz the Depressed said h. Memes. And Oz the Depressed said we're almost there. Lomax 223 said and Oz the Depressed said let's get down to business. And Oz the Depressed said HM. Lomax 223 said I am a try this. And Oz the Depressed said nice. And Oz the Depressed said I'ma kill myself. Lomax 223 said. And Oz the Depressed said, oh shit. And Oz the Depressed said, ha, it didn't work. And Oz the Depressed said. And Oz the Depressed said, fucking shame. Lomax 223 said. And Oz the Depressed said, I don't know if I should stop courting. And Oz the Depressed said, oh no. And Oz the Depressed said, I probably should. And Oz the Depressed said, bye losers. And Oz the Depressed said, please like, commit suicide and subscribe.